Rising thousands of feet above the South American rainforest are mountains that seem almost impossible. Their cliffs are so steep that for centuries, nobody knew what existed on top. People believed they were the homes of gods. Explorers believed dinosaurs might still live there. And even today, scientists continue finding species found nowhere else on Earth. When we think about hidden worlds, we usually picture deep caves or the darkest parts of the ocean. But some of Earth's most isolated landscapes were hidden in the opposite direction. High above the rainforest are ancient plateaus separated from the world below for millions of years. This is the strange world of the tepuis, one of the most isolated and fascinating landscapes on Earth. The word tepui comes from the language of the indigenous Pemon people and is often translated as House of the Gods. Standing beneath one, it's not difficult to understand how that idea took hold. More than 100 of these mountains are scattered across the Guiana highlands of Venezuela, Brazil, and Guyana. From a distance, they look almost unnatural. Flat summits rest high above the landscape, while sheer cliffs plunge thousands of feet toward the rainforest below. Some rise so abruptly from the jungle that they seem less like mountains and more like pieces of another world that somehow landed in the wrong place. The most famous of them is Mount Roraima. Its summit stretches for miles above the clouds, surrounded by towering cliffs. For most of human history, reaching the top was nearly impossible. Anyone standing below could see the summit. Very few could actually get there. And Mount Roraima wasn't alone. Each tepui existed as its own isolated world. Scientists often compare them to islands. The comparison makes sense, although these islands aren't surrounded by water. They're surrounded by air. The rainforest below acts almost like an ocean, separating one summit from another. Over time, each mountain became increasingly isolated from its neighbors and the world below. For millions of years, many of these plateaus existed in near separation from everything around them. That isolation raises another question. Why do these mountains look like this in the first place? Most mountains have peaks. Mount Roraima looks like somebody took a knife and sliced the top clean off. The answer takes us back almost unimaginably far in time. The rocks that form Mount Roraima are around 1.7 billion years old. To put that into perspective, these rocks were already ancient before the first animals appeared in the oceans. Ancient before forests covered the land. Ancient before dinosaurs ever existed. Back then, the tepuis weren't isolated mountains rising above the rainforest. They were part of a vast plateau that stretched across the region. Then time got to work. For hundreds of millions of years, rain, rivers, and erosion slowly wore away the surrounding landscape. Layer after layer disappeared, and entire sections of the ancient plateau were carved away. The tepuis are what remain. That combination of age and isolation would eventually create one of the strangest ecosystems on Earth. However, long before geologists studied the tepuis, people were already trying to explain them. One of the most famous Pemon legends centers on Mount Roraima itself. According to the story, the mountain was once part of an enormous tree that held all the fruits and vegetables of the world. The hero Macunaíma, in a moment of either great courage or catastrophic impulse depending on how you read it, cut the tree down. The crash split the earth and unleashed a great flood that reshaped the world, and the stump became Mount Roraima. Standing beneath its cliffs today, it's easy to understand why the mountain inspired stories like this. Its summit often disappears into the clouds, giving the impression that it belongs to another world entirely. And the Pemon were not the only people who looked at these mountains and imagined another world. When European explorers eventually began documenting the tepuis, they found themselves confronting the same mystery. The summits were hidden above sheer cliffs, often wrapped in clouds and separated from the surrounding landscape by natural barriers that made exploration extremely difficult. Reports from the region described isolated plateaus rising above the rainforest like islands suspended in the sky. those accounts captured the imagination of people far beyond South America. In 1912, author Arthur Conan Doyle used the idea as inspiration for his novel, The Lost World, a story about explorers discovering a remote plateau where prehistoric creatures had survived untouched by time. It was an exciting premise, and for a while, some people genuinely wondered what might be waiting on top of these mountains. However, no dinosaurs were ever discovered on Mount Roraima. What scientists eventually found was something different, and in many ways, far more interesting. Life on these summits had spent millions of years evolving in isolation, following its own path while the world below continued to change. And that isolation produced something extraordinary. By the time scientists finally began studying these summits, they realized something remarkable. Each tepui had become its own isolated ecosystem. For millions of years, the towering cliffs surrounding these plateaus made it extremely difficult for plants and animals to move between summits or reach the rainforest below. As populations became separated, they began evolving along their own paths. The environment itself is surprisingly harsh. The ancient sandstone that forms the tepuis breaks down into nutrient-poor soils, while constant rainfall washes away many of the nutrients that remain. Clouds frequently blanket the summits, creating cool, wet conditions that feel completely different from the rainforest below. But life adapted. Some plants developed unusual strategies for survival, including carnivorous species that trap and digest insects. Strange rock formations rise from the landscape. Dark pools collect in shallow depressions, and patches of vegetation cling to an environment that offers few easy opportunities. One of the most famous residents is the Roraima bush toad, a small amphibian found only in this region. Unlike many toads, it doesn't hop particularly well. When threatened, it often curls into a ball and rolls away down the rocky terrain. It's an oddly practical solution that sounds almost made up until you watch it happen. The bush toad is only one example. Scientists have documented numerous plants, insects, and other organisms that exist nowhere else on Earth. Some species are found on a single tepui and nowhere beyond its cliffs. Over millions of years, these isolated worlds produced ecosystems unlike anything found below. And even today, scientists are still uncovering what lives in them. For all the exploration that has happened here, the story of the tepuis is still being written. New species continue to be discovered across the region, and many of these mountains remain only lightly studied. Every expedition has the potential to uncover something unexpected. That possibility is part of what makes the tepuis so unusual. We live in an era where satellites can map remote wilderness from space, and smartphones can show us nearly any street on Earth. It's easy to assume there are no real frontiers left. The tepuis suggest otherwise. After millions of years of isolation, these mountains still haven't revealed all of their secrets. And perhaps that's why places like this continue to capture our imagination. In a world that often feels completely mapped and understood, the tepuis remind us that there are still corners of Earth capable of surprising us. If you enjoy exploring hidden worlds, strange places, and the mysteries our planet still keeps to itself, consider subscribing. There are plenty more waiting to be discovered. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.